It wasn't just a ship, it was a warning to the world. When the USS Iowa cut through the Pacific waves, even Japan's proudest admirals whispered its name with unease. They called it the floating fortress, a battleship so powerful, so unyielding, that it seemed carved from legend itself. Built not just from steel, but from the sheer will of a nation that refused to bow, the Iowa carried the thunder of 16-inch guns that could shatter mountains, and the hearts of anyone who dared face it. Torpedoes missed. Bombs failed. And as the war raged on, the ocean itself seemed to protect her. While other ships burned and fell beneath the waves, this one defied fate. To the men who saw her silhouette on the horizon, she wasn't just an enemy. She was invincibility made real. The ship Japan could never sink, the USS Iowa. When World War II unleashed its fury across the oceans, every nation raced to rule the waves. Japan had the mighty Yamato, a colossal symbol of imperial pride. But across the Pacific, America was quietly building something different, not just a ship, but a statement. The USS Iowa was that statement. She wasn't born from desperation, but from dominance, a masterpiece of speed, armor, and unstoppable firepower. Commissioned in 1943, she became the pride of the U.S. Navy, leading fleets through storms, battles, and history itself. Her guns could hurl shells the size of cars over 20 miles, and her radar saw enemies long before they could strike. But it wasn't her weapons alone that made her legendary, it was her spirit. The Iowa was a symbol of America's belief that technology and courage could reshape the tides of war. Every time her engines roared to life, she carried not just sailors, but a nation's determination to never kneel. This is the story of the ship that refused to sink. The ship that turned fear into legend, the USS Iowa. Before she ever fired a shot, the USS Iowa was already a legend in the making. Her story began in the tense early 1940s, when the Pacific was ablaze and the world's fate seemed to hang on steel and saltwater. Japan's navy dominated the seas with monstrous ships like the Yamato and Musashi, and America knew it needed something greater, something faster, stronger, untouchable. In the shipyards of New York, thousands of men and women worked day and night, shaping a new kind of power. What they built was not just another battleship, it was a symbol of American resolve. The Iowa stretched 887 feet long, with armor thicker than a man was tall, and engines that could push her through the water at 33 knots, faster than any battleship on Earth. She was designed to hunt giants. Every bolt, every rivet, every plate of armor spoke of confidence, a nation that had learned from Pearl Harbor and would never be caught unprepared again. Her 16-inch guns could launch a 2,700-pound shell farther than the eye could see, and when they fired, the earth itself seemed to tremble. Sailors would later say the deck shook like thunder, that even God must have heard her roar. But the Iowa wasn't just about firepower. She was a marvel of engineering elegance, a perfect balance of speed, defense, and endurance. Her radar could spot planes and ships long before the enemy ever knew she was near. Her turrets rotated with mechanical precision, guided by new technology that turned warfare into mathematics and mastery. Even before her first mission, the world took notice. Japan's naval command received reports about a new super battleship, and in hushed rooms across Tokyo, officers speculated about its power. They called it the ship that couldn't be sunk. When she was finally launched on August 27, 1942, the crowds at the Brooklyn Navy Yard erupted in cheers. The band played, the flags waved, and as she slid into the water, it felt as if America itself was rising with her. To the men who would serve aboard her, the Iowa wasn't just a war machine, she was alive. They gave her nicknames, spoke to her like a living thing, and believed that somehow, she was watching over them. When she joined the Pacific Fleet in 1943, her arrival wasn't quiet. Every sailor knew that a new era had begun, the era of the Iowa-class battleship. And at its heart was the first, the fiercest, and the proudest of them all, the USS Iowa. She wasn't just built to fight. She was built to end wars. From the moment her hull touched the sea, one truth became clear. The Pacific would never belong to Japan again. When the USS Iowa finally sailed into war, the Pacific trembled beneath her hull. It was 1943, and the world was watching America's new giant take its first steps into history. No longer just a marvel of engineering, she was now a weapon of destiny, her 16-inch guns primed, her crew ready, her name whispered across enemy waters with both fear and fascination. Her first great mission came not in open battle, but in secrecy. In November 1943, the Iowa carried one of the most important passengers of the war, President Franklin D. Roosevelt himself. She transported him across dangerous Atlantic waters to the Tehran Conference, where the Allies would plan the final blows against Hitler. Every man aboard knew the stakes. German submarines prowled the depths, and one torpedo could have changed history. But under the Iowa's watch, no such fate came close. Her guns stood silent, her armor untested, yet her presence alone sent a message to the Axis: America had arrived, and she would not travel quietly. But the real test came months later, when Iowa was sent to the Pacific to face the Empire of Japan. The ocean was vast, the air thick with danger. American fleets were now pushing westward, island by island, toward the Japanese homeland, and leading the way was the floating fortress. In the spring of 1944, she joined the assault on the Marshall Islands. As her guns opened fire for the first time, the sea exploded with light and fury. Each shell she unleashed weighed more than a small car, carving the horizon into pillars of flame. Her gunners, trained with ruthless precision, struck targets miles away, Japanese airfields, gun batteries, and ships, all erased in seconds. The sound was unlike anything sailors had ever heard. Veterans said it wasn't just noise, it was pressure, a shockwave that rattled bones and hearts alike. When the Iowa fired, she didn't just destroy, she declared. In June, she became the flagship of Admiral Willis A. Lee during the Battle of the Philippine Sea, one of the most decisive naval clashes of the war. Japan sent hundreds of aircraft in desperate waves to crush the American fleet. But Iowa and her escorting carriers were ready. Her radar-guided guns filled the sky with flak and fire, tearing through enemy squadrons before they could even see their targets. That day, Japan lost so many planes that its air power never recovered. Pilots who survived called it the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, a slaughter that marked the beginning of the end for the Imperial Navy. Iowa stood at the heart of that battle, unscathed, her crew watching as flames danced across the distant horizon. They cheered not for blood, but for survival, for victory bought through precision and power. Later, in 1944, she supported the invasion of Leyte and the liberation of the Philippines. Her guns thundered against shore defenses while her radar tracked enemy ships fleeing in panic. One Japanese admiral reportedly ordered his men to avoid confrontation with the Iowa at all costs. To them, she was no ordinary battleship, she was a curse from the gods of war. By the war's end, the USS Iowa had become more than a vessel. She was a legend afloat, a ship that could silence the storm, that carried hope as much as destruction. Through fire, fury, and endless waves, she never faltered. And while countless ships of war sank into history, the Iowa kept sailing, proud, unbroken, and unstoppable. In her wake, she left not just the wreckage of enemies, but the echo of a new kind of power, one that would define the seas for generations. Beneath the thunder of her guns and the gleam of her armor, the true soul of the USS Iowa wasn't made of steel, it was made of men. More than 2,000 sailors called her home, a floating city of courage that never slept. They came from every corner of America, farmers, factory workers, dreamers, bound together by duty and the endless blue horizon. Life aboard the Iowa was a world of contrasts. Above deck, power roared. Below, the hum of engines and the rhythm of machinery filled the air. The men lived shoulder to shoulder in narrow bunks, eating, laughing, and working within walls that shook each time the main guns fired. They were brothers forged in noise and heat, in sweat and salt. Each man had a role: gunners, engineers, cooks, signalmen, all vital threads in the tapestry of survival. When general quarters sounded, every sailor became a soldier. In seconds, the ship transformed from calm to chaos, steel doors slammed shut, guns swung toward the horizon, and the air filled with the scent of oil and fear. Yet no one flinched. They trusted the Iowa, and they trusted each other. To them, she wasn't just the battleship. She was their girl. Sailors spoke of her like a living being. She had moods, quirks, even luck. They believed her armor had a spirit, that she watched over them when the sea grew cruel. And when shells roared from her turrets, the crew felt her heartbeat through the deck beneath their boots. During long nights between battles, they'd gather on deck, staring into the stars that mirrored on the dark sea. Some wrote letters home, others cleaned weapons, and some simply sat in silence, listening to the waves lap against the hull that had saved their lives time and again. They were young, but they carried the weight of nations. Every man knew that one mistake could mean disaster, yet they carried on, steady hands guiding a fortress through hell. When people spoke of the Iowa's strength, they often meant her armor. But her real strength was human, the courage of ordinary men who turned iron into legend. Because even the mightiest fortress is nothing without the hearts that keep it alive. As the Pacific War reached its brutal peak, whispers began to spread across enemy waters, whispers of a ship the Japanese could not sink. To them, it was as if the ocean itself had chosen to protect her. To the Americans, she was proof that ingenuity and courage could defy fate itself. The USS Iowa was no ordinary battleship, she was an engineering miracle. Every inch of her design spoke of resilience. Her armor belt was thicker than a man's arm span, her decks layered with steel and teak to absorb punishment that would have shattered lesser ships. Beneath her sleek hull lay a labyrinth of compartments designed to contain damage, a genius system that allowed her to stay afloat even after being hit. She was built to fight wounded, to bleed but never fall. Enemy pilots soon learned the futility of trying to sink her. Japanese bombers dove through flak storms, dropping torpedoes that never struck true. Those that did were deflected by her hull or neutralized by the Iowa's blistering speed. She moved like no battleship should, fast, unpredictable, alive. Her gunners turned the sky into fire, creating a wall of steel that swallowed any aircraft daring enough to come close. During one attack in late 1944, enemy bombers descended from the clouds, hoping to finish what others had failed. Explosions tore across the waves, the air thick with smoke and flame, but when it cleared, the Iowa still stood, her guns blazing, her flag unburned. One Japanese survivor would later recall in awe, "It was like fighting a mountain that moved." But what truly made the Iowa unsinkable wasn't just her armor or design, it was the unity of the men who served aboard her. They trained for disaster until it became instinct. Fires were extinguished in seconds. Leaks were sealed before they could spread. Every sailor knew that their survival depended not on luck, but on trust and precision. In the eyes of her crew, the Iowa wasn't just invincible, she was sacred. Her very presence boosted morale across the Pacific. When fleets saw her silhouette on the horizon, they felt safer, stronger, unstoppable. To the Japanese, her name became a curse, the floating fortress. To the Americans, she was a promise, that no matter how fierce the storm, she would not go down. By war's end, the myth had become reality. The Iowa had faced everything the enemy could unleash, bombs, torpedoes, kamikazes, and she had endured it all. She bore the scars of war, but never the shame of defeat. In a conflict defined by destruction, she became a symbol of endurance. Where other ships sank into memory, the Iowa remained, riding the waves like a defiant monument to the will of a nation that refused to break. The Pacific may have swallowed many names, but never hers. When the guns finally fell silent in 1945, and Japan surrendered beneath the shadow of American might, most ships returned home to rest. Many were decommissioned, scrapped, or forgotten, silent ghosts of a war that had ended. But not the USS Iowa. Her story didn't fade with the peace. It evolved. Even after the war, she remained a symbol of strength, the embodiment of America's ability to adapt, endure, and lead. In the years that followed, as new conflicts emerged and the world plunged into the Cold War, the Iowa once again prepared for duty. She was modernized, upgraded with new radar systems, advanced weaponry, and missile defenses, transforming from a World War II battleship into a Cold War guardian. During the Korean War, she returned to combat, her guns once again thundering across enemy lines. From the frozen coasts of Korea, her shells screamed through the night, lighting up the darkness with the same fury that once echoed over the Pacific. She was older, yes, but her roar had not weakened. She remained what she had always been, the last word in American firepower. For decades, she served quietly, a constant presence as technology reshaped warfare. Jets, missiles, and submarines may have ruled the new age, but the Iowa stood firm, a reminder that raw power and resilience never go out of style. Even presidents came aboard her decks. She hosted Roosevelt in war, and decades later, Ronald Reagan in peace. She was not just a ship anymore, she was a living chapter of history. When she was finally retired, the Navy didn't dismantle her. Instead, they preserved her, as a museum, a monument, and a legend. Today, she rests proudly in Los Angeles, her massive gun still pointed toward the horizon, her decks echoing with the footsteps of visitors who come to feel her story. To stand on her steel decks is to touch the spirit of a century, the courage of those who built her, the sacrifice of those who sailed her, and the pride of a nation she helped defend. The Iowa did not just serve America. She became a part of it. Time has a way of fading heroes, of turning giants into footnotes. But not this one. The USS Iowa still stands, her decks kissed by sunlight, her hull touched by history. Every bolt, every dent, every echo in her steel tells a story, not of war alone, but of endurance, unity, and pride. She was built for battle, yet became a monument to peace. She once roared with fury across the Pacific, and now she whispers lessons to those who walk her decks, that strength without purpose is nothing, and that courage, when joined with heart, can shape the course of nations. Generations have come and gone since her guns last thundered, but the legend of the Iowa has not dimmed. She remains the symbol of an era when men dared to dream in steel, when courage was measured in waves crossed and battle survived. And though the world has changed, though satellites watch the skies and machines now fight our wars, the Iowa still reminds us of something timeless. That power is not only in the weapon, but in the will of those who wield it. She was more than a battleship. She was the soul of a nation, forged in fire, carried by waves, and destined to live forever in the echo of the sea. The floating fortress Japan could never sink, still sails in memory.